Hi everyone, welcome to those of you that have joined us for the next 30 minutes or so, where we are going to have a bit of a whistle-stop tour on pupil wellbeing and why it should be at the top of your agenda. On this first slide here, you can see the link to our website, where if you want to watch or share the webinar after the event, you can do, and I'll pop that on the last slide as well for you to have a look at. For those of you that don't know me, my name's Emma Bolchin. I'm NGA's Director of Professional Development, and alongside that I also govern in an alternative provision and SEMH special school, and also trustee of a medium-sized primary MAT. So wellbeing is certainly kind of one of those core issues that are at the top of our agenda. Okay, without further ado, we shall have a look at what we're going to cover this afternoon. Okay, so we're going to have a look at the current situation, and we are going to have a look at promoting a whole school wellbeing culture, which will include a more detailed look at some questions for you to ask, and also some data monitoring suggestions for wellbeing in particular. And the last slide has a very brief look at some further resources. It's a jam-packed agenda, so I don't propose spending very much time on the further resources, but all of the links are in the presentation, and also we'll send you a post-webinar email which will contain all of that information too. The only additional piece of information is that after the webinar, we are going live with an information sheet which will be available in our Knowledge Centre for our members, that's got a bit more information and consolidates some of the key questions for boards to ask from the presentation and a few more. Okay, so first of all, I thought it'd be really helpful for us to have a quick look at what do we mean by mental wellbeing. If you've got questions, by the way, as we go through the presentation, please do use the chat, use the question function and ask them. We've got a couple of staff who are on hand who will try to answer those, but any that we don't get to answer, we will get back to you post the session. I was hoping that we might have time at the end, but knowing how many slides we've got to get through, I don't want to leave out any of the information that we've got to cover tonight. Okay, so we define mental wellbeing as children and young people's happiness, life satisfaction and positive functioning. Young advisors describe this in the Public Health England and Anna Freud Mental Wellbeing Toolkit in the way here that you can see on the slide. Wellbeing is an umbrella term, isn't it, that's used to talk about all sorts of physical and emotional health. But for the purpose of the webinar, we're very much going to focus on that emotional, mental wellbeing side of it, not ignoring the fact that that contributes to lots of those other elements of health and wellbeing as well. Okay, so having a look at the current situation, you can see from these kind of fairly current, although one of them dates back to 2019, but fairly current headlines, that it certainly feels as though there's a lot of attention and focus that there's a worsening pattern with regard to young people's mental well-being. However, there is also a fairly widespread acknowledgement that there is insufficient robust data to really give us a clear picture. And in particular, Robert Halfon, the chair of the Education Select Committee, has called for data to be collected more robustly and more regularly for us to have a clearer picture. But our next slide looks at some of the data that is available nationally. So sitting behind some of these key headline stats, I have got some kind of supporting information that just add a little meat to the bones, really. So for example, Anna Freud's survey of 3,000 young people from November 20 to January 21 tells us that the top 3 factors that had a negative impact on young people's mental health were schoolwork, exams and family. So clearly, at least 2 out of 3 of those have got a really big impact or implication for the work that we should be doing in schools. 93% of the young people surveyed believed that mental well-being should be something that's taught explicitly in schools. And just about half of them identified that they did have an adult that they would talk to in school, which is great, but it also does mean that half of them didn't have an adult in school that they would talk to. We do know that the majority of people talk to family, but given that family was one of those top concerns, it's quite concerning that if you can't go to family and half of them don't have an adult to speak to in school, who do they go to have that conversation that's needed? Also, there was information from Early Intervention Foundation that was well supported by an NEU survey that school teachers in England have reported increased levels of anxiety and depressive symptoms in terms of mental health, particularly over the last 12 months, probably not surprisingly. 62% of teachers said that they had noticed that there were children presenting mental health issues post the pandemic who they had not noticed any concerns about prior to the COVID-19 pandemic. And there was just 4% of teachers who reported no changes, which is obviously, I suppose, expected given the way that we all feel about what's been happening of late. It's been really difficult, as we've said, to get some clear data, but I, in a previous life, worked for the National Healthy Schools programme, and we used to turn to the school's health education unit for support. Since 1977, they've been conducting health-related behaviour surveys and questionnaires in around just short of 15,000 schools. And very recently, sort of 1920, they reported on a survey of around 1 million children, specifically about emotional health and well-being. And these were some of their key findings, which I think are quite helpful to give us some specifics about school children and school. Their latest report focused on emotional health and on self-esteem in particular. It seems to decline through the school year and recover over the summer, whilst concerns over schoolwork and bullying rise as the year progresses. They again supported the national data available that family is the most cited source of support. They also point out that girls seem to worry much more than boys do. And the most common worries, again, like the previous surveys mentioned, they did cite schoolwork. Although what was different to the Anna Freud study was that appearance was a second high worry rather than exams and family. Older girls who are spending lots of time online reported the poorest well-being overall. However, it isn't such a straightforward picture because it also found that children who had moderate access to those devices and social media and all of those things scored the highest for well-being. So it's quite difficult to find that really fine balance about what is it that, you know, brings out all of the positives around computer technology and social media and all of those things, and actually when does it become damaging. 6% of 14 to 15-year-olds in the report said that they self-harmed, which is obviously also of concern. However, it's really different dependent on the area you are. It's more frequently girls who self-harm, according to the data set. But for instance, in Manchester, the rate of boys who self-harmed was particularly high, whilst in Oxford, it was particularly low. And I suppose I make that point because I think it's really important for us to have in mind the fact that our local context will also make a difference. And if we're thinking about this data in order of how to set our own priorities, obviously that locally available picture is really key. Okay, so we're going to do a bit of interactivity, and what I'd really like to know is whether this picture feels right. So actually, is the national context of, or the headlines, if you like, telling us that mental health and pupil wellbeing has particularly declined over the last 12 months or is on the downturn? Is that kind of something that feels as though, do you know what? Yes, we know about that in our school and it does match. Is it something that you can test? Actually, No, it's not our picture. So Molly, could I ask you to launch our poll, please? Thank you. Okay, so have a look at the poll and do interact with us here on the screen. I think that Molly said that she's going to give you about sort of 30 to 40 seconds. So get those clickers clicking, and then we can share the results as they come in. Okay. So some people are saying that emotional health and well-being's increased. Some people are saying it's decreased. Some people are saying no difference. And we've got quite a few people saying it's not reported. Okay. So can we share those? Can everybody see those results? Okay, thank you, Molly, that's great. So fairly even in terms of increase and decrease, which is surprising. 15% no difference. Again, I'm sort of, you know, it's interesting that in some areas it hasn't had such a negative impact, or you don't feel it's had such a negative impact. And that 16% who have said actually it hasn't been reported to us, that could be about the time of the year and all of those sorts of things, but it'd be really helpful to go back and kind of ask the question about what do we know about emotional health and well-being, what is the sort of key things that we could get reported. Okay, thanks Molly. We will go back to the slides. Okay, so why prioritise well-being? Apart from the fact that there are all those kind of nasty statistics out there that we would not want for our children and young people, I guess, you know, all of our visions, whether it's a school or trust vision, they are all about enabling children to be happy, healthy, well-rounded individuals, especially as they sort of arrive into adulthood, aren't they, to enjoy their schooling. But also that low self-esteem that we've seen reported is associated with children being less happy or less healthy in other aspects of their life. So there are factors such as weight being an issue, whether it's obesity or whether it's anorexia. There's a lower likelihood of children with low self-esteem exercising or eating a proper breakfast, which consists of a drink and something to eat. There's a lower likelihood that they get 8 hours sleep, and it's strongly associated with a fear of bullying, alongside other things in the later teens, such as increased cannabis use. Another thing is that emotional well-being is also a really clear indicator of academic achievement and outcomes, success and satisfaction in later life, which is kind of our raison d'etre, isn't it, in the education sector. An impact study on the area that the DFE conducted found that on average, children with higher levels of emotional, behavioural, social and school well-being had high levels of academic achievement and were more engaged in school. And if this wasn't already high on your agenda, or I haven't done enough to convince you by now, then there's always that last point on the slide there of those regulatory sticks to encourage you as well. So we've got our Ofsted framework and the statutory duties as well. Okay, so we're all keen to address pupil wellbeing. What's the best way to go about it? I've popped this slide up here because Public Health England have got sort of what's called a whole school approach at the heart of their framework for this. And from my experience as part of the Healthy Schools programme, and certainly there's a growing body of evidence that just says if you want to see, I suppose, embedded and lasting behaviour change, which actually makes a difference to the whole school community, a whole school approach is the best way about it, which really just means that it's embedded through all aspects of school life and everything that you do. It means embedding it through these 8 principles. So Public Health England have come up with these 8 principles. And actually what I'm going to do to make that I suppose clearer is to go through each one in turn and talk to you about what does that look like as a governor in terms of leadership and management and each of these as we go through them. I'll spend a little bit more time talking about identifying need and monitoring impact, and I'll put kind of questions throughout the slides as well. So hopefully those are either questions for you to reflect on as a board, i.e. where are we at now and what could we do better, or they're questions that you could go back directly to your school or trust and start asking at your next meeting or tomorrow. Okay, so first of all, I've merged leadership management and ethos and environment because your strategic role is all about this. So setting the ethos, the vision, the values, it's part of your core functions, isn't it? And NGA believe, and Public Health England and the Department for Education are calling for the board to have it as their role to provide strategic leadership which champions this whole school approach to wellbeing. So to set an ethos and culture that's inclusive, promotes resilience and provides space for pupils to feel supported and listened to. We would recommend that you use this as part of your strategic review so that the area can be given the focus that children and young people need. Okay, and then this next slide are some of those reflective questions around, first of all, yourself. Is your approach to wellbeing reflected in your vision, values and ethos? Have you identified what wellbeing areas you need to prioritise as a board or as a school or a trust? And have you devoted adequate resource or budget towards supporting this area? Okay, so our next couple of points are around particular curriculum teaching and learning, which is obviously largely the operational side of what's going to happen. However, have you asked how is mental health taught in the curriculum and how does the broader curriculum support and promote wellbeing? It kind of goes beyond, if you like, PSE and beyond the statutory elements of RSE. And then on student voice, I guess I want to emphasise that because evidence tells us that children do well when they feel listened to and they're empowered to make decisions. For us as well, it's a key link to what we think is the fourth core function of stakeholder engagement. So do your pupils feel listened to and safe? And how do you know as a board? And how are children involved in meaningful decision making? They're just ones that you can go back to school and ask really. Have your staff had training to enable them to support this area of work? And also, how are they supported in relation to their own mental well-being? And then this really is just a nod also to the fact that NGA have got further guidance and resource on staff well-being and workload. We can't model those really healthy behaviours to our children and young people if our workforce aren't also in that really positive place themselves. Okay. Identifying need and monitoring impact is something that I think it's worth us spending just a little bit more time on. So I've got a few more slides on this section. And really, it starts with, I suppose, having a closer look at some suggested data sources, resources and support that's available to you, as well as the questions that you can ask. So once you've worked with senior executive leaders to identify wellbeing priorities, boards need to put in place arrangements to monitor strategic progress and any impact this activity has on children and young people. What information do you ask for in your head teacher reports? What about stakeholder surveys? And what are you looking for specifically on this when you do? She says, when you do. Some people did talk actually about doing virtual visits, which is good, but when you do your school visits. If we're going to ensure that this area has adequate focus, have you thought about having it as a standing agenda item in your meetings? Okay. So we did a web poll that asked you whether you already actively monitor pupil wellbeing, and loads of you did, which I think is absolutely brilliant. But you'll see here that 16% of you don't do it yet. So hopefully we've convinced you that actually it is a good idea to monitor it and to start asking for that information. And the ways in which you do that are varied and many. So the next slide goes through some of those really good ideas and tell us a little bit about what you're already doing. So these are the kinds of data that you could ask for, or that you can look at if they're already relatively readily available. I like to picture the mood stickers and the emotional check-in cards, and suspect that at governance level, actually, you're just getting reported that there's a general trend in either them going up or them going down. But on top of that, there are some fairly standard bits of data that I am sure you all already do get reported, even if you don't kind of make that mental link between this is about well-being. So those are cited on this slide. And actually what's really good about some of these is that there are nationally available data sets so that you can compare this information and benchmark yourself. And thinking about that in mind, the next slide is to really talk a little bit about what's the quality of data that you collect about pupil wellbeing like. So what sort of surveys, if any, and some of you that aren't necessarily really focused on this yet might not do that. Molly, could I ask you to launch our next poll, please? And again, remember you've only got about 40 seconds, so please do get pressing those buttons for me. So it's just thinking about, if you do your own surveys, do you specifically dig down into wellbeing? And also, if you do, are you able to use that data against other available data out there? So do you know how well your school is doing compared to schools nationally or in your area? Are you able to really dig down and decide what sort of priorities you should be setting, not just that emotional or mental well-being is a priority area, actually what bits of it, you know, if you're a school in Manchester, a secondary school, are you looking at self-harm, particularly in boys, etc. Okay, so at the moment we've got the vast majority of you who do a school designed questionnaire. Probably about a third don't know or don't survey. And then we've got 8% who regularly, kind of by regular, I probably mean biannually. Sometimes people do it annually, but biannually I would say was fairly regular in terms of having one of those externally designed with benchmarking data available to us, one of those real deep dive nuts and bolts surveys. So I think that's really interesting. I'm surprised it's not higher, just by virtue of the fact that the school's health education unit survey so many schools, and I know that sometimes it's funded by local authorities and things like that as well for you. Okay, back to our presentation then. So this is really a great resource to help schools, but also page 45 and 46 provide an index of tools. So I've obviously mentioned the school's health education unit because it's one of those that I've kind of used and I'm super comfortable with in order to get that really dig down school level data. Which is included as one of those different interventions and tools available for schools in here. What's really good about page 45 and 46 is that they've really gone to town and looked at every different type of survey or tool that you can use to measure emotional health and well-being. Then there are summaries, so the tick whether it's free, what different aspects of well-being are covered. I think it's got in there the cost of them, whether feedback is generated for you or not. And then beyond page 45 and 46, the toolkit kind of operates as a bit of a catalogue. So if you can see that meets you, see a few that meet your needs, you can then go toward the back of the toolkit and actually find the detailed information about those particular tools, which I think is really, really helpful. So it's free, and I would advise everybody, or at least every school, if not yourselves, to head and have a look at that in detail. Okay, so we're back to our whole school approach, and this is really about targeted support. So are we making the best use of local support services? And I'm just going to take a breath here to tell you about this link that is on this slide in particular. So we met with the Department for Education colleagues last week, who are really hoping that governors will be one of the field forces that promote these mental health support teams. If you click on this link, you can find out whether you've got a mental health support team in your area. There are 57 nationally at the moment, but between now and 2025, they're due to expand this programme quite dramatically, and their aim is to train a member of staff in every single school across the country to be a senior mental health lead. So it's a bit of a watch this space, but they did tell us last week that the the tender for that training programme is imminent, so it shouldn't be too far off. And obviously we've got between now and 2025 for that to happen, but it would be good, wouldn't it, to have somebody really championing this on an operational level in all of our schools. Okay, so further to that, boards should be asking what clear systems and processes are in place for identifying mental health problems. Keeping children safe in education requires routes to escalate and referral systems to be outlined in your safeguarding policies. And there's also statutory guidance on supporting children with mental health conditions in school. But do any of your other policies need updating, whether it's behaviour or whatever, to reflect perhaps your changed or renewed commitment to mental well-being? So I think that's just something worth flagging. And then the final but important element of the whole school approach is the work that schools do with parents and carers. So how do you let them know that you've got this focus on mental well-being? Is your school contacting parents and carers and telling them about all of the academic catch-up that's available for their children and all of the lost learning, which we've heard lots about, haven't we? Or are they really focused on supporting mental well-being in this post-pandemic kind of time? And are you tuned in as governors to either informal information that you can get from parents and carers in the local community, or perhaps through more formal surveys? What do parents think and what do they need to know about this? So if there's extra support available, is school or the trust a real key way that lets parents know about that? Okay, so this last slide brings us to our further resources. So this is just to flag to you some of those things that we think are really important, potentially could really support you in this area. So the Well School community is a free online community, and there's the link there. The mental health support teams, we've included the link to that in the presentation for you. Again, it will be in the post webinar email too. And then we've also got some of our own resources that we've flagged here. And also we'll have, after today, our information sheet as well in our knowledge centre. Okay, so I have set myself a little stop clock here, which tells me I'm actually about 60 seconds before the end of the presentation. And if any of you, I suppose, want to, it means you've got time to make a note of the webinar and where the slides will be, although Molly did tell me she will send them to you as a PDF. So hopefully all of the web links and all of those things you can access afterwards. Again, I hope people manage to answer questions for you, and if not, we will absolutely get back to you with those very soon after the webinar. Thanks everybody, and enjoy the rest of your evening.